How's it going, everyone? I hope you're all having a wonderful day. I'm Amos, and for today's video, I would like to talk about a series that I've been reading as of late. It's a series that shows what people can accomplish with enough determination and resolve. The series I'm going to be talking about today is Dr. Stone, or more specifically the protagonist, Ishigami Senku. Now, I do want to focus primarily on Senku, which I'm assuming you could tell from the title of the series. However, I can't talk about Senku without including the cast as a whole. The reason being is the themes associated with the series: trust, desire, and determination. A lot of what makes Senku such an interesting character is the relationships he forms throughout the series. His main character trait, the one the series primarily revolves around, is his incredible scientific knowledge, which allows him to create things that seem impossible to create at the time. It's important to realize that Senku has never really made anything on his own. At least nothing mind-blowing. He did make some clothes and a hut. Well, he did also discover that nitric acid can unpetrify anyone whose consciousness hasn't faded, but that's besides the point. What I'm trying to say is, whenever he wanted to make something that would instantly advance the technological period they were in, he needed someone else's help to do it. His reliance on others is what allows him to accomplish all of these near impossible feats in such a short amount of time. Now, this video is going to be broken down into two parts. The first talking about the anime portion of the series, while the second focuses more on the manga. So yes, the video will contain spoilers, and I will let you guys know when I start talking about the manga. For now, I will start by talking about the parts that were covered in the anime. So again, spoiler warning for those who haven't seen it yet. First things first, I'm going to discuss the plot. The story begins with a light engulfing the planet and petrifying all of the humans and birds. We don't know why only humans and birds were affected, but what we do know is that all of the humans on the planet were just turned to stone out of nowhere. From there, we see a man named Taiju de-petrify after being a statue for 3,700 years. He goes and looks for the statue of the woman who was petrified with him, Yuzuriya. Taiju was going to ask Yuzuriya to be his girlfriend before they got petrified, so his first priority was locating her. When he did find her, she was still a statue and holding onto the same tree she held on when she was first petrified. There, carved into the tree, was a letter calling him a big oaf and telling him to follow the river. We already know that Senku is the only one who calls him a big oaf, and of course Taiju immediately knew who left the message and raced down the river to see Senku waiting for him. From there, Senku told them that he kept count of how long they had been petrified for, because if he somehow found a way to escape the petrification, he would want to escape during the spring, where it was easier to prepare everything he would need to survive. He also believed that Taiju's determination to tell Yuzuriya how he feels would prevent his mind from going dark. From there on, they experimented with the nitric acid by mixing it with alcohol to eventually create a revival fluid that can de-petrify anyone who's at least a whole statue. Senku knew he would need someone with a lot of strength and endurance, so he set Taiju in the cave where the nitric acid was dripping on him to eventually help him escape. He believed Taiju would escape to seek out Yuzuriya and find his message. He would then seek him out and help him by gathering supplies and do any other form of heavy lifting for him. Then Taiju went above and beyond from what Senku was expecting from him. They were gathering grapes to store for later while trying to come up with a way to get alcohol. Taiju came up with the idea to use the grapes to make wine, which Senku didn't even think about. His simple-mindedness allowed him to think outside the box and come up with an idea that Senku overlooked. After getting the revival fluid, they wanted to bring back Yuzuriya, but were ambushed by a pack of lions. They fled towards a statue of a strong fighter known as the strongest primate high schooler, Tsukasa Shishio, and revived him. The instant he de-petrified, he defeated the lions. After spending some time together, Tsukasa began admiring Senku's intellect and dedication to science, but he also disliked it. Tsukasa believes that the world turning to stone was a good thing because greedy adults who benefit at the expense of others no longer existed. He believed this because when he was a kid, he was gathering seashells to make his sick sister a necklace, but a drunk old man whose private beach Tsukasa was on beat him up for trespassing. Because one old greedy adult got mad at him for trespassing on his private beach, Tsukasa wasn't able to give his sister a seashell necklace before he lost her. He was worried that Senku might try and revive these greedy adults, while he only wanted innocent and pure-hearted youths to be revived. He confronted Senku about this, but Senku disagreed with his viewpoint. Worried that Tsukasa might turn against him, Senku wanted to keep as much information away from him as possible, like the miracle cave that the nitric acid was in and the formula for the revival fluid. Unfortunately, Taiju ran up and stated he had enough revival fluid from the miracle cave to revive Yuzuriya. At first, Senku got mad at Taiju for revealing the secret, but Senku took full advantage of Tsukasa's curiosity. Senku told Tsukasa where the cave was, and when he left to get the nitric acid, Senku created the revival fluid and resurrected Yuzuriya. Senku then informed them that Tsukasa is a murderer who breaks statues of adults. He then gave them two choices, either run or stand and fight. Both Taiju and Yuzuriya chose to stay. It was really interesting for Yuzuriya, who just woke up and doesn't really understand what is going on, to choose to stay. This just went to show how much faith she has in Senku and Taiju. At that moment, Tsukasa showed up and pretty much asserted his dominance by dropping pieces of a statue he just smashed, grabbing an arrow shot at him out of thin air, and roundhouse kicking Taiju. Taiju then attempts to convince Tsukasa to beat him up instead of smashing the statues. Of course, no one sees Taiju's logic behind this deal, but it does give you a sense of Taiju's character. We know that Taiju is a pacifist, but this scene shows us that he will rather get hurt than watch others suffer, or in this case, die. After this conversation, Tsukasa went back to smashing statues. Senku decided to use this opportunity to alter their home, to make it look like the three of them quickly gathered their stuff and fled. When Tsukasa came back, he could tell that the scene in front of him was staged to make it look like the three of them had gathered their things in a hurry and ran away. What makes it worse is that Tsukasa knew where they were going and why. In an earlier conversation, Senku informed Taiju and Tsukasa that crushed seashells have 4 uses, but changed it to 3 a little later. Tsukasa acted ignorant by not letting them know that he was aware of the 4th use. When they fled, he knew they were going to Hakone to get sulfur from a hot spring to make gunpowder. This happens a lot throughout the series, where we are led to believe Tsukasa has average intelligence, but he seems to understand enough about science to be able to predict what Senku is going to do. He managed to hunt them down by following the sound of explosions Senku was making. Senku did this because he saw a smoke signal in the distance and made explosions to communicate with the one who was sending up the signal. With that, Tsukasa managed to track their exact location and took Yuzuriya hostage in order to get the revival fluid formula. Senku tried to act cold and logical, but when Tsukasa sliced at her neck and cut her hair, Senku began sweating like he was completely terrified. Tsukasa, after spending just a few days with Senku, figured out his personality. He knew Senku would never abandon his friends because instead of hiding Yuzuriya's statue, he depetrified her. Yuzuriya was about to kill herself, but Senku told Tsukasa how to make the revival fluid to save her. Despite knowing Tsukasa will kill him to prevent the advancement of technology, Senku still gave him the formula in order to protect Yuzuriya. Then Tsukasa gave Senku a choice: either swear to never invent anything ever again, or die. Tsukasa knows that Senku can't lie when it comes to science, which is true. Senku can't promise to never invent anything and not mean it, which, now that I think about it, he did lie about the 4 uses of the seashells, but whatever. In that moment, Tsukasa begged Senku with a bleak look on his face to stop inventing because he didn't want to kill him. We learned this a little earlier, but Tsukasa doesn't like killing. When he killed the lions, he wanted to use their flesh and skin as to not let any of it go to waste. He did this to pay respect to the animal for killing it. In an instant, Senku responded by stating he can never stop inventing. Tsukasa promised to kill Senku quickly by breaking his cervical plexus, which will result in Senku dying in a matter of moments. Before he does, he tells Senku that if they had met before the world turned to stone, he may have been his first ever friend. Now, when I first saw this scene in the anime, I was confused because nothing about his and Senku's interactions together led me to believe that they hit it off. But we do see later on why Tsukasa thought this way. I will discuss it when we reach that point, but for now, keep this conversation in mind. Tsukasa did as he promised he would do, and broke Senku's neck. Taiju showed up at that very point and saw Senku get killed. Both Taiju and Yuzuriya then grabbed Senku and fled from Tsukasa. There, Taiju remembered something. Senku would randomly crack his neck, which he never did before. They found that his neck was still petrified, so they poured the last bit of revival fluid they had left, and Senku's neck healed, bringing him back to life. Senku then gave Taiju and Yuzuriya a very important mission: to infiltrate Tsukasa's army and act as his spies. He also gave Yuzuriya a secret mission, which was to gather the stone fragments of the statues Tsukasa would smash and then repair them. Senku goes on to seek the one responsible for the smoke signal. Now, from this point on, I'm going to speed through the plot, because we have reached the part of the story that primarily focuses on developing technology rather than the characters. Senku runs into a girl pinned under a tree. This girl is Kohaku. She's the one who sent the smoke signal and then fought against Tsukasa after he killed Senku. Senku proceeded to create a lever to free Kohaku, who then guided him back to her village. She had believed the explosions and him coming back to life was an act of sorcery. From that line, we are led to believe that Kohaku is not someone who depetrified, but instead someone who was born and raised in this stone world, and she wanted to introduce Senku to a friend of hers who was studying sorcery. The village sorcerer was named Chrome, who had gathered a bunch of minerals from exploring caves and uses them to change the color of fire. The villagers were shocked to see this. But Senku saw through it, and everything else Chrome threw at him. From there, Senku began building up his kingdom of science by gathering materials and creating new things. He slowly but surely won over the villagers, while also making preparations to face off against the Tsukasa Empire. He even recruited one of Tsukasa's spies named Gen, who referred to himself as a mentalist, whose specialty was magic tricks and deception. We also learned that the villagers have some knowledge of the past thanks to the 100 Tales, which are stories to either teach the villagers about survival, materials, or hints about hidden stuff that only someone who got petrified might understand. After Senku heard about Kohaku's sister being ill, he resolved to win over the village by curing her. This way he can get his kingdom of science as well as manpower for his inventions. He succeeded in making antibiotics, as well as winning a tournament that allowed him to become the village chief. That also got him married to Kohaku's sister, Ruri, but then he divorced her 3 seconds later. We also learned that the village is called Ishigami Village, which was Senku's last name. Ruri also revealed that the 100th tale was called Ishigami Senku, and reveals that she has been waiting for him. We then learn that Senku's adopted father was up in space when the world was petrified, so he and the other astronauts with him came back to Earth and helped create this village and the 100 tales to help Senku. Byakuya, Senku's father, believed that Senku would depetrify someday, so he did everything he could to make sure Senku would have as much support as he could give him, and it made a huge difference. For example, he left hints about a hidden message in one of the tales. The tale spoke of a bee called a speaker, which can sting a tombstone and speak to the dead. Senku figured out the meaning of the tale and discovered a glass record hidden within one of the founder's tombstone. The record had Byakuya telling Senku to play this song to the villagers to help win them over. The song was by a famous musician who was in the spaceship with Byakuya. Senku used the song to not only help motivate the villagers, but also recruit some members of the Tsukasa Empire to their side. And after a year of preparation, the Kingdom of Science finally made their move. Senku made a cell phone and had it delivered to Taiju and Yuzuriya. It was buried at Senku's fake grave where Taiju and Yuzuriya would go every day. They noticed that the dirt looked a little softer and discovered there was a cell phone buried beneath. After hearing Senku ask them to bring people from Tsukasa's army to the grave, they did it without asking why. Senku then had Gen impersonate the musician from the recording to convince the members of the Tsukasa Empire that the US was back up and running. Believing that help was coming, the members of the Tsukasa Empire began aiding the Kingdom of Science. Then when the Kingdom of Science had their entire forces together and prepared, they charged at the Miracle Cave and took control of it. Then Tsukasa and Hyoga, Tsukasa's strongest warrior, showed up. The Kingdom of Science then fought to delay them while Senku, Gen, and Chrome tried to come up with a way to defeat them. The Kingdom of Science was willing to fight the world's strongest warriors because of the faith they had in Senku and the science team. What's most important to note here is that the faith wasn't some sort of blind devotion. They truly believed they would come up with a plan because of the amazing miracles Senku had already shown them. He's displayed his devotion to science and his unwillingness to use it to cause permanent harm onto others. Senku doesn't want to use science as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool to aid society. It's not for his own personal gain. He does have his own goal to achieve, which is to go to space. It's his lifelong dream to become an astronaut, and he wants to return the world to modern times to reach that goal. And currently, he's using the Kingdom of Science to aid him in that endeavor. He believes in them just as much as they do with him. He knows that they are no match for Hyoga and Tsukasa, but he believes that not only will they buy him enough time to come up with the solution, but even help him find it. Like how Chrome found a bottle with a little bit of sulfuric acid in it, which helped Senku make nitroglycerin, in other words, dynamite, which Senku then used to threaten Tsukasa into surrendering. Now remember that little part from earlier that I told you guys to keep in mind? This is where we get a little more info about who Tsukasa Shishio truly is. We know that he wants to purge the world from the rich and greedy adults, while he himself would fight in boxing matches, make TV appearances, and a bunch of other stuff that was making him a lot of money. Despite making a ton of money, he didn't want the wealthy to return. If he despised the wealthy, then what was he doing with all the money he was making? Senku ended up putting the pieces together and realized that Tsukasa's sister was actually still alive. She hadn't lost her life, she was simply brain dead, and Tsukasa was paying to keep her alive. Senku then informed him that with the power of the revival fluid, they can bring her back since the depetrification process heals all wounds like how it did when Tsukasa broke Senku's neck. Tsukasa then asked him how he knows that it will work and why should he just take his word for it. Senku merely responded by stating that all he can do is give him his word and wasn't that enough. Tsukasa, despite being enemies with Senku, believes that Senku giving his word is more than enough for him to place his trust in him. During these parts, we get a flashback of Tsukasa's past, and we see him researching a little about science to see if he can learn of a way to save his sister. This is where Tsukasa's knowledge comes from, and how he understands what Senku is thinking in terms of the scientific stuff he does. And just like Senku, Tsukasa also persevered through impossible odds with him trying to keep his sister alive. When he saw Senku attempting to restore civilization to its modern time, and showing them he has the capability to do so, is when Tsukasa felt a kind of kinship to Senku. It was then when he thought about how he and Senku could have been friends. It's similar to the other members of the Kingdom of Science. When they saw how Senku can create these incredible pieces of technology, they started believing he could do almost anything, and that's where their faith in him comes from. It's him constantly creating things that everyone thought would be impossible in this stone world, and now he just proved to them that he can even bring the dead back to life. After he brought back Tsukasa's little sister Mirai, there was an explosion at the Miracle Cave, sealing it up. Then Hyoga attempted to attack Mirai, when Tsukasa jumped in and shielded her with his body. Hyoga then pushed Tsukasa and Senku into the river and jumped in with them. They washed on a shore downstream where Hyoga proclaimed himself as the strongest warrior now that Tsukasa has suffered a fatal wound. He then wanted Senku to work under him and help him create a world where they only resurrect the strong. Senku didn't like Hyoga's proclaim, stating that he will resurrect all 7 billion people. Hyoga then began cutting Senku in an attempt to torture him into submission. Then Senku started flipping out, throwing rocks at Hyoga, when suddenly the rocks broke apart and turned into birds. The rocks were actually petrified birds that Senku poured revival fluid on. While Hyoga was distracted by the birds in his face, Tsukasa got up and punched him. Tsukasa and Senku then teamed up to beat Hyoga thanks to their understanding of each other's weaknesses and strengths. They were able to support each other enough to place themselves in prime position, so that Senku can use the battery he had hidden on him to create a taser to shock Hyoga and cause him to lose consciousness. At the end of the season, Senku promises to save Tsukasa by figuring out what caused the petrification of humanity and using it to petrify and reanimate Tsukasa's corpse. It's already been proven twice that the depetrification process can heal all wounds, even fatal ones, so Senku promises to save Tsukasa with the power of science. He then cryogenically freezes his corpse to preserve it until they have the petrification instrument in their hands. With this, the second season of the anime comes to an end, with Tsukasa entrusting his life with Senku. A running theme of trust that is shown throughout the series. They fully understand each other and will place their trust in one another. And it never disappoints, because of the constant struggles each of them has gone through. They understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, so they don't doubt what the other can do. And they place each other in the ideal situation to succeed. Now, from this point on, I will be discussing the manga. I will not be discussing the plot too much like I did earlier in the video, as to not discourage anyone from reading it. But I will be discussing new characters and key events that displays how these people affected the rest of the cast. The anime ended hinting at the gang going around the world in search of the petrification device. So of course, the manga picks up from that point. When they started building boats, they decided to set out in search of a sailor and came across Ryusui Nanami, the prodigal son of the Nanami clan. The Nanami clan were a wealthy family of shipbuilders and sailors, and Ryusui was a prodigy at building model ships and sailing since he was exceptional at reading the winds and predicting the weather. Only problem was his personality. He's a greedy, wealthy person who could possibly throw the group's chemistry into disarray, but Senku still revived him with no hesitation because he was the best option they had. They even tested his skills by making him pilot a hot air balloon. With his ability to read the winds, he easily flew it, until a massive thunderstorm appeared, and the balloon tore slightly, making it difficult to maneuver. If they tried to suddenly turn or tug on one of the ropes, the balloon would completely tear. After seeing there was nowhere for them to run, Chrome believed that the best thing to do would be to go straight up and through the cloud. So Senku threw the revival fluid into the fire, creating a small explosion, which knocked him out of the basket. But he was able to grab onto a handlebar and hang on for dear life. While the explosion propelled the balloon up, Ryusui threw his hat to find an updraft that they could take to get out of the storm. After escaping the cloud, both Chrome and Ryusui had this little bro moment where they praised each other's skills, while Senku was just hanging off the edge waiting for them to come help him. This scene is what causes them to start trusting each other and relying on the other person to handle things on their end, without any cause of concern. Ryusui may have been a greedy person who nearly caused the group to lose sight of their goal, but good thing that Senku and Gen are good at turning things into their favor while keeping everyone happy. So instead of going against Ryusui and causing him to become disgruntled, they gave him what he wants, and pretty much manipulated him to turn the tides in their favor, while simultaneously gaining his trust and friendship. That trust and friendship came in handy during the hot air balloon ride. Senku trusted Ryusui would get them out of the storm cloud, which is why he threw the revival fluid into the fire, causing the explosion. That trust would not have been there if Senku and Gen weren't flexible and adaptive to Ryusui's ridiculous demands. They turned a difficult negotiation into an opportunistic one. I know I had kept this part vague as to not reveal too much, but I'm going to give a little more details from this point on, including spoiling the climax of what would be the third season. So one last spoiler warning before I continue. The scene I have been referring to this whole time is when Senku informed him about building a boat. Ryusui realized that they need fuel for what they were going to build, and he wanted the rights to that oil field and for them to purchase the oil for him in exchange for him sailing the boat. For all of this to happen, he invented a currency and started giving people money for them acting like his servants. So Gen and Senku took advantage of this by selling ramen, cotton candy, and mangas to start saving up money to buy the oil when they found it. The issue was that the currency Ryusui created didn't have any legitimate value until they found the oil, and Ryusui trusted that they will find it and was giving away money like there was no tomorrow. The problem was they were struggling to find the oil field, but they did find hemp however, so Gen decided to play the market a bit. He informed everyone who has been saving up money that their savings will be worthless without the oil. If they wanted to protect their investment, they need some new goods, so they gathered a bunch of hemp to make cloth, which was used to make the balloon for the hot air balloon. More importantly, they used the cloth to design classy clothes and open a department store. Now that people had things to purchase, the Dragos, the currency Ryusui developed, actually had some legitimate value. And of course, Ryusui, being the greedy person that he is, practically bought the entire department store, giving Senku and Gen a massive war chest to purchase oil with. Since Ryusui got the rights to the oil field, he has no animosity towards Senku. And of course, Senku used Ryusui's greed to acquire funds so he doesn't need to worry about giving away the oil field. Since neither has any hard feelings towards the other, all they have is trust and mutual respect for each other's skills, leading to some of the most outstanding scenes during the climax of the next arc. The group had located the petrification weapon, and during the climax of the arc, it got activated. The beam was slowly engulfing the island they were on, and Chrome, knowing that they would be unable to escape it, instructed everyone to line up and stick their hands out towards the beam. When they started petrifying, they were supposed to hold their other hand up and start raising fingers to signify how long it took them to get petrified. This information was used by Senku to calculate how long it took to become a statue. He then figured out what time he should throw the revival fluid onto himself to depetrify, and he managed to time it perfectly, all because of his friends who sacrificed themselves for him. The level of trust the entire Kingdom of Science had in Senku was absurd. They knew they were done for, so they used their life to at least give Senku a chance, since they knew he will come up with a strategy for victory. This level of fate isn't just given. Senku earned their trust, and he never disappoints them. He always achieves his goal. Every character has their own desires that they wish to fulfill. Senku wants to return humanity to its original point. Tsukasa wanted to create a world filled with only pure-hearted youths. Chrome wants to learn as much about science as he possibly could. Ryusui wants all the luxuries that the world has to offer. Everyone has their own goals, but only one of them actually fought against the other. Even though Tsukasa had a desire that contradicted Senku's, they still managed to work things out at the end. One key factor in that would be that Tsukasa doesn't like killing. He showed remorse when he killed a lion. He was sad when he killed Senku. And on his deathbed, he revealed the location of all the statues he destroyed. He refused to forget where he broke them, because he felt guilty for doing it. He was fully committed to his desire, but still felt remorse at what he's done. It allowed Senku to trust Tsukasa after they had won the Stone War. On the other hand, Tsukasa had trusted Senku from the moment he saw him make soap from seashells. They all understood each other, and that understanding allowed them to gain an inevitable trust in one another. And as we've seen it allowed civilization to advance millenniums in a matter of a few years. Thanks to Senku's intelligence, a lot of stuff that we thought would be impossible to make came back into existence. He didn't achieve this alone. He had comrades to help him, in Chrome and Kaseki, the village artisan. And even though the others didn't help invent anything, they aided him with physical labor, manipulation, and combat whenever necessary. They all have their set roles, and they play it to the ideal point that even if things don't work out, the faith that they have in one another allows them to fail because they know they have someone covering for them. Whether it's physically, emotionally, or mentally with science, there's always someone there. They are all determined to help each other and advance civilization, and that all began with Senku working to bring civilization back to modern times. And that's going to be it for this one, folks. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you all in the next one, and remember to keep having fun. See ya!